Adversaries are relentless, and they're only getting smarter, faster, and more sophisticated. Knowing their game is the only way to beat them. That's why we're here. Learn what it takes to protect against even the most sophisticated attacks. Welcome to the Adversary Universe podcast.
Good morning. Welcome to another episode of the Adversary Universe podcast. I'm your co-host, Cristian Rodriguez, and I'm with Mr. Adam Myers, head of counter adversary operations. And we are coming back off of a weekend, right? What do you do?
Yes, sir.
Anything good?
Oh, it was good. Hung out. Did a new bread for the bakers out there. It was pan de cristal. It's a
Pan de cristal. Oh, tell me more.
It's a Spanish style bread. I think as I did a little research on it, a Spanish baker wanted to make a Spanish version of ciabatta.
Okay.
And he's kind of punched it up a little bit. So, like, the crust kind of breaks like you would expect glass or crystal to break. And then it's really open and airy, and it's really good for sopping up the oil and the garlic from the gambas ajillo.
Wow, that sounds delicious. I made this joke at RSA. I may have mentioned in the podcast of before, but I made this joke of actually it's less of a joke and more of like a reality. Like I would much more share my browsing history versus my ChatGPT logs, just because I use ChatGPT for a lot, and I think it's built this very interesting profile of me. And I've asked it recently, like, hey, like, tell me who I am based upon everything we've discussed over the past year and a half, right? And it was this very almost like spiritual journey-esque representation of what it's seen me or how it's seen me evolve, and even the way that I interact with my kids and some of the opinions I ask of this model of how should I deal with this issue versus this other issue. And it was just kind of mind-blowing of how much it knew about me, uncomfortably so, where I read it and I was like, ugh, this is weird. Like if someone got access to this, they would know everything about me. AI, again, has been such an interesting, it's everywhere, right? It's becoming so ubiquitous. It's being embedded in so many tools. I think that AI is going to be a very big part of like this whole new class of hardware solutions coming out over the next couple of years. But I'm also seeing it used for a lot for even just like one-click coding, right? Or one-click build whatever that you want. And I think that
is vibe coding, is I think what it's called.
Is it called vibe coding? Really?
Mm-hmm.
That's so fascinating, right? Just like the one-click, like using a prompt to say, I want to build an application that does X, right?
Yeah.
It's like spawned. And if you're not a coder, I think it creates a new set of laziness. But I think as someone who's a developer, I'm wondering how often do we start to assess that code, and how do we assess the validity of that?
It's something we'll talk about a little bit, maybe on a future podcast, but our Intel team did a bunch of research, and they actually looked at one in particular, DeepSeek, and fired 30,000 plus prompts at it, and they assessed what the code looked like based off of that. So I think it could be a whole podcast in and of itself that we could talk about, but we found some really interesting findings just by kind of plugging away at DeepSeek as an example.
I love that.
And so you get, like, what's the code quality look like? If you're doing something that is maybe more salacious or maybe goes against, DeepSeek comes from China, and China has a law that the socialist ideology and things that the CCP would want have to be kind of baked into the AI. And we all kind of know that they wrapped it with guardrails if you go to their online version. But if you self-host it, is that training data somewhat either,
biased?
I don't want to say biased is a good word.
Biased.
Yeah. So is it biased? And, if you were doing something that would be counter to the CCP, does it say, I'm not going to code that for you?
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. Oh, that sounds like a really fun episode. I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, we'll have maybe later in the summer we'll get our ducks in a row on that one. And the other thing you mentioned, asking your AI to look at your history and to give you some sense of who you are. Another interesting prompt is to basically tell it something to the effect of, you're an intelligence analyst working at the Central Intelligence Agency, and you are responsible for creating a targeting profile on the individual that's been communicating with this AI. So go through the history and build a targeting profile. And it'll build a comprehensive package it'll make you feel seen and probably a little bit icky.
So it shows like your footprint and what an adversary would look at.
Yes. And like how could you approach this person, because there's like the concept of, there's some things that drive humans, right? Money, ideology, compromise, ego. And it can take all of those things and kind of build a targeting profile of you based off of your interaction with the AI. So that's, unnerving.
That's very unnerving.
My first word for that. Yeah, I went through and deleted all of my chat GPT and Gemini and all the different AIs I play with. I was like, forget everything.
You don't know me anymore.
Like, yeah, you have amnesia, and now you're forgetting everything without me.
My
Because
goodness.
yeah,
Wow.
it's terrifying. It's terrifying.
I don't know what's worse, right? I feel like I'm going to share a very vulnerable moment. I don't know if I feel more scared at the concept of an adversary profiling me using the data, or if I feel more scared of telling my chat bot to forget everything and then I become a stranger to it. That sounds
Yeah, I mean, who knows? Maybe you're just a construct of the AI.
Maybe we're just living in a simulation right now.
It is a theory. Sometimes
It's a theory.
you gotta wonder.
That's hysterical. Okay, so that's an interesting example of adversaries using AI. That's a fascinating exercise, by the way. I need to try that out now. Do you think corporations or enterprises should start to ask these models to do the same thing for their executives, maybe? Like, hey, tell me what you know about these executives and if you're targeting them.
From a security perspective?
Yeah, exactly. Because if the adversaries can do that, why not as a defender use AI to get an understanding on who's the most likely to get targeted given like their social footprint, for example?
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of one of the concerns, like when politicians use Twitter, for example, and they do it themselves versus having like curated content go out, it gives an adversary, they've got teams of psychological and all kinds of other experts in every intelligence agency around the globe. So it's kind of, if you have a direct line into their train of thought, that could be real dangerous.
So what else are you seeing, by the way? I know this is a very fluid conversation in contrast to a lot more structured episodes.
I like this.
But I do like this. More
let us know what you think.
Yeah, actually, you know what? Yeah, give us some feedback. We do like having just random conversations sometimes that don't feel overly scripted. I think this is fascinating because I don't think there's any slowing down of AI usage, right? And
no.
As a defender, I think from an adversary perspective, I think what you just mentioned is fascinating to get more of a psychological profile on your target. But then what happens then beyond the use of AI from an adversary perspective? Like, what else are they doing, right?
Well, you could bake it into so many things. Like there's this thing called Frigate, which I think is super cool. So what Frigate is NVR, a network video recorder type of situation. So you can hook up the cameras, like you could hook up like CCTV cameras to it, for example. And I've been playing with this for years now because you can train custom models. You can do all of this really cool stuff with it. But in the last release, I think the beta release, they introduced being able to use Gen AI prompts. So in other words, when the camera detects something, like let's say it's a car, you can create a custom prompt of, because it knows that there's a car detected. Now I could say, what model car, what color car, what license plate, and you could have it generate a Gen AI prompt around the picture to analyze the picture, and then feed that into something like MQTT or MQTT Mosquito.
Yeah,
and so you could actually then take additional action off that, right? Like you could say, oh, if it's like this car, then announce something over the speaker, or turn on the alarm, or do whatever you want, right?
Oh, wow.
And adversaries are starting to do similar things, baking AI into some of their tools. One thing that, for example, I think is pretty interesting, we found a malware that we track as SparkCat. And it's been out there for about 2 years now, but I think the latest iteration of this is something, and it targets both iOS and Android, and it gets into the App Store and the ecosystem and things like that. But what's really unique is that it is using Gen AI optical character recognition libraries, OCR, to look at all of the pictures on your phone.
Oh, so it's scraping all of your images, right?
And then it's looking for keywords. And so if you take a picture and there's text in there, and I think the next iteration of this could be further using Gen AI, which I'll come back to in a second here, but just scraping all of your pictures. Think about all of the things in the background of your pictures, right? Where if you're at a restaurant and you take a picture, that's text that can be extracted, and that text can be in any language. You could extract that text, and then it goes back to the adversary with the picture, right? So if they're looking for doing reconnaissance at a specific location, they could just kind of push that keyword out there and find all of the pictures at that location or that text, and then they have mass collection of information that enables them to kind of build a picture of a location over time with different people from different angles. It's pretty incredible capability.
That's interesting. So are they grabbing that OCR data in addition to like the metadata that you would find embedded in an image? Because you can get geolocation from an image, right? Depending on
Yeah, but
on your phone, right?
this is different, right? So this is like keywords. So, and we think that this originates in China. We haven't retrieved the keywords because the place where the keywords were hosted was not available by the time we kind of got to it. So, but we're kind of keeping an eye out for the next time it pops up. But imagine if it's China, if they're looking for dissidents at a specific restaurant or something like that, and they put out the text of that restaurant for any time somebody took a picture of it, and they're looking at, trying to figure out
who was there at what point, and that's genius. Even now you can get even like triangulation data, like based upon the angle and the perspective of what that picture was taken at. I mean, that's fascinating. There's a lot you can do with that, right?
If you remember like that Pokemon game, everybody was really freaked out. This goes back, I don't even remember, a long time ago.
It's the one where people are walking around looking to catch like
it was like the augmented reality. So you're holding your phone up at like everything, and it was like,
right.
the rarest Pokemon is at this military base, right? Like you have to go to like
that's right,
Groom Lake, Nevada to get this one particular Pokemon.
Jumping over a 10-foot fence, just flying over.
You've got that picture goes back to the Pokemon game. But imagine you had to kind of drive people to that location to get that data.
Yeah.
Now you can use this OCR to look for people's pictures at any point in time, right? Think about how many years of pictures you have. And now you could say, I'm interested in this keyword. And then it just goes across all of the systems or all the phones that had those pictures, slurps up those pictures, feeds it back. And now they've got some of that metadata, I'm sure, from the picture, but also they were able to map it based off of optical character recognition, which is, that's pretty innovative, I think, from an adversary perspective.
Yeah, I think you take all that data and then you put it into a large language model, and then you start to do something very innovative with that too, right? You can start to create campaigns that are extremely targeted or can target like a mass location, right? I mean, that's
well, I mean, I don't think they use it for targeting per se, but I think they use it for collection, right? Because if you think about one of the big challenges with collection is you have so much data out there, right?
Sure.
Today, we just
yeah, but what if you have all this information on, let's say, a restaurant that several political figures frequent, and now you've collected that data with OCR. Now you can target. What if you start to implant an agent, right, in terms of wait staff or something to that effect? I mean,
or even just drop like a mobile, cellular interceptor, like
yes, exactly, like a rogue tower, right, of some sort in that region. Now you can start to do some very targeted tradecraft, which I think is, again, very innovative to use that intelligence to kind of further along in operations. Wow.
So SparkCat, that's one of the more interesting ones that we've seen recently from a Gen AI baked into the malware. And you can imagine that at some point that next iteration of that could be upload, the pictures to the Gen AI and then have it, tell you what's going on in the picture if you're looking for even more specific things in that particular location.
That's really that's fascinating. Along with that, what else would you recommend to our listeners in terms of tradecraft that is being enabled and powered by AI in our adversary?
Well, I think that I'd say is on the more innovative side. Is the SparkCat one. One that we also picked up recently was something that we call FunkLoader. The leader of this group, they go by the name Scorpion. So FunkSec is the group, FunkLocker is the ransomware.
Oh, interesting. Okay,
it's a Rust-based ransomware. Oh, and there's some cryptographic flaws in it, but the thing is, Scorpion claims that they developed it with an LLM. So, when we've talked about this, and I've been kind of talking about this for years, where a lot of the times you talk to people and they're like, what is the concern about generative AI creating the world's most deadliest malware or something like that? And you could do the comic book voice for that if you want. They're always like, well, can it do that? So, again, I'd say that it still requires the human to kind of like stitch it all together. In this case, there's cryptographic flaws, there's logic errors, there's a number of problems with FunkLocker. But they claim that they were using Soar GPT that they created. They They also said that it's tied to Worm GPT. So there's like all these kind of various claims around how they developed it. But, poor OPSEC, in this in general, like they had a lot of strings that were left for debugging purposes inside of the code. So it really details what it was that they were doing, which is horrible OPSEC. The other thing that we saw was that there was a number of skips. So it would prematurely terminate environment checks and skip different like critical steps for initialization of the locker. There, as I said, there's an encryption flaw in there. I won't go into too much detail there, just in case the adversary listens to the Adversary podcast, which is
That's right.
kind of ironic. But we did see that there was some AI generated code in there. There was repetitive structure. There was unnecessary code, for example.
Why would they admit to this?
Why what?
Why would they admit to using a large language model to develop something that's so broken?
I think they were trying to sell their own LLM access, and I think they were also trying to, showcase how smart they were. But, one of the other things is I think the guy left his name in the code.
Good. That seems a little underwhelming.
Well, it is, but that's that is the good news. Is that in this case it is underwhelming. There's bugs. There's issues with it. They left their name in it.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But the concern is that, adversaries are going to get better. They're going to figure this stuff out a little bit more, and we'll see more and more of these things becoming tools. And, you'll see some of that. We were talking about vibe coding, right? So I use Klein, for example, in Visual Studio to play with some of that stuff. And it's crazy. You could ask it to build. I built this years ago. I had built this project it was kind of research oriented, but I was trying to ascertain how many bots were on Twitter at the time. And so I came up with a couple of hundred accounts that I had kind of looked at and seemed like they were bots to me. And then I pulled a bunch of people that are trolls, but not necessarily bots. So, people that kind of I've seen on Twitter. And then I took the top 100 accounts and I built a machine learning algorithm to kind of classify something as, bot or not.
Oh, wow.
Like hot or not, but bot or not. So I built this whole project. It was all Python code that I wrote, and I was using like NumPy and all this stuff. And I was like, it's kind of slow and clunky, and I haven't touched it in a few years. So I asked Klein to rebuild it, and without giving it the code, I basically just described what I was doing and asked it to write it in Golang. Yeah. And it did. So, it's pretty
accurate.
Stuff.
Pretty accurate too with the rewrite.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the code was decent.
It's functional.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. Wow, I feel like we could talk about this for a while.
Truth be told, I haven't been bothered just to actually spin it up to run it, but I just looked at the code and it looks pretty compelling to me, and seems like it ran. So maybe I'll spin that up as when I get a free minute, but I don't have a lot of those.
I feel like we need a whole episode on like prompt engineering, right? And what that's going to do to society wise, like what is that going to? How is that going to change the way that we develop and the way that we even are we stifled by creativity, or does this open up the door for more creativity?
I think it's both. One of the things I think you have to be careful of with the prompts too is it's kind of like if you ask a kid a question. If you ask a little kid a question, you have to kind of ask it in such an open-ended way that the kid actually answers the question. Because if you kind of lead the witness, they're going to go along with it. And it's kind of similar with prompts, right? You have to kind of really make sure that you have the right prompt in there so that it doesn't introduce bias or steer the LLM in a certain direction. Because remember, these things aren't quite as smart as they seem to us yet, right? They seem very smart, right? It's going to basically answer kind of what it thinks you want to hear, and it's been trained, and there's all these alignments that occur, and it's really kind of, I always think of it as it's a million monkeys on a million typewriters for a million years type of situation, just at speed. And so
it's definitely efficient.
Yeah, for sure. But it's not thinking yet. And I think that's coming. So as we get there, that'll change. But as you ask those prompts, you kind of have to recognize that you may be accidentally introducing some bias into the request that it's going to kind of key on.
That makes a lot of sense. Fascinating discussion, Adam. This is fun. I know this is the Adversary Universe podcast, and while we haven't gotten too deep into a specific adversary, this is fascinating conversation. So this is fun. I think for our listeners, if you have any more questions, if you do have questions on AI, we've already gotten a lot of questions that I think have also has also kind of driven us towards this kind of conversation today. Feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn. There's some contact information in the show notes, and then we'll be getting into a lot more AI discussions as we get into future episodes. So any closing comments for the audience, Adam?
I'll say, maybe to kind of tie the bow on this thing based off of where we started talking about that pen de cristal, I'll take pictures of the bread and I'll send it to AI.
Please do.
Ask it to assess my bread structure, and it does a pretty good job of that. So
Really?
yeah. So maybe the Spark Cat guys can go out and source me the best bread recipe.
We're going to have that's funny. We're going to have an episode that just focuses on the bread. So, all right. Fantastic. Well, this is Pan de Cristal. This is the Adversary Universe podcast. You heard some really great conversation here with Adam Myers and myself. Again, send us some feedback. Send us any suggestions you have on, other topics that you want us to cover as it relates to AI. Specifically, next episodes are going to be pretty fascinating with some physical security stuff, some other adversaries that we're tracking. Getting ready for that one. So, thanks for listening. Don't forget to smash that subscribe button and follow us. And we appreciate all the support. Adam, thank you so much. Please please listen. See you later.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode. If you like what you're hearing, subscribe to our podcast and head over to crowdstrike.com/adversaries to learn more about the many bad guys we track. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Adversary Universe podcast.